Can the Seattle Seahawks find a way to use Jalen Milroe in the 2025 season? What's going on, everybody? Good morning. Hope you guys are doing well. First video in a few days here. Again, get used to that during this dead part of the off season. Once we get to July, I'm going to start a little series that should get us pretty much the whole way to training camp, but it's probably not going to be daily uploads just because there isn't enough to talk about. But there are certainly some things that merit further discussion, and today we're going to be talking about one of them with the rookie season outlook for Jalen Milroe. And this is one of the more interesting topics with the Seattle Seahawks right now. This is certainly one of the more compelling debate topics when it comes to talking about Seahawks stuff. So I've already discussed this in bits and pieces in prior streams and some prior videos, but I think it's worth going into a little bit more now that we are in June, and we have heard some fairly good things about Milroe coming out of minicamp. So at the very least, there are positive things to hang your hat on. Now, those positive things will mean nothing once we get to him actually playing in real games. We're not even going to remember how he did in his rookie minicamp once the actual game started. It'll all be about what he's doing there. But let's talk about this a little bit. Please like this video if you haven't already. Click the thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new. Click the bell for notifications. Become a channel member for $2 a month. Those are the best ways to support the channel. Okay, so let's talk about Jalen Milroe's rookie season that is coming up here in just a few months. First, I want to talk about, well, this. Whether or not Jalen Milroe will start games and be the starting quarterback in year one. I'm pretty cleanly dismissing that for the time being. I think that is such an unlikely possibility that it doesn't really merit that much depth of discussion. You signed Sam Darnold to a $100 million contract after the season he just had, and you give him the starting job coming out of the gate. It's pretty clearly his to lose. And Milroe, at the end of the day, is unlikely to be ready for NFL action, even in the best case scenario. You're not doing him any favors by starting him day one, or really, I would say at any point in year one, quite possibly in year two as well, but we'll get to that next year. But I'm not talking about this. What I am talking about, however, is the possibility of him finding other ways to get onto the field. So we're talking about a two-quarterback system or some similar arrangement. And this is not something that happens in the NFL very often at all. And typically when it does happen, it happens for like one or two plays a month, right? So sparingly, it's barely even worth thinking about. Like, I remember the first year the Seahawks went to the Super Bowl, they had a play where Seneca Wallace, who was the backup quarterback, lined up at receiver, and he caught a long pass in the NFC Championship game against the Panthers. But that might have been the only play all year where Seneca Wallace lined up at wide receiver. That might have been the only play he played in that wasn't garbage time, or the garbage game at the end of the season when we already had the one seed locked up and we didn't care about winning or losing. But I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about something a little more meaningful than that, because if Jalen Milroe plays for the Seahawks in 2025, but it's only like two meaningful plays, then that's not having an impact. Let's talk about having an impact. When has this happened recently? When in recent NFL history has a team legitimately had a rotation at quarterback of some kind, or at the very least involved a second quarterback in their offense? If you go back far enough, you can find a decent number of examples. Like, you go back to the 90s, Cordell Stewart was a pretty decent example, but the game was so different back then. We're talking about basically his first two seasons before he became the full-time starter in Pittsburgh. He was doing a lot of different things for that team, and you can see here that in very, very limited action these first 2 seasons, including only 2 games that he actually started at quarterback. He did some throwing, he did some, if you get down to it, some rushing, and he also did some receiving. He actually did a good amount of rushing and receiving. So they found a way to make it work here. Like if you go to the game logs, you can see that even though he didn't really play very much quarterback here, and by the way, when he did play quarterback, it was mostly just to do things like quarterback sneaks and stuff. But this was his rookie year, by the way. This was the year Pittsburgh went to the Super Bowl and lost to Dallas. You can see in pretty much every game he's getting on the field as a running quarterback or running back or receiver, and it's not very often to throw the ball. And you go to 1996, he still was not the starting quarterback, but pretty much every game he's getting some utilization as a runner, receiver, or even a little bit as a quarterback. He threw 30 passes. Not a lot of success, but they used him. But that's the 90s. If you want to talk about more modern football, like more recent football that we as, I don't know if I'm middle-aged yet, but people like me can actually reasonably remember, I can only really recall 2 examples of this working in the way in which it would work with Milroe. Because you do have examples like Ronnie Brown. Some people talk about Ronnie Brown. I'm not really thinking about that because Ronnie Brown was a running back who could throw the ball pretty well. And Miami used the Wildcat offense for a little bit with him. But nobody thought Ronnie Brown was a quarterback. Ronnie Brown was a running back who could throw the ball better than the typical running back, so they used him. But every team has players that are not quarterbacks that can throw the ball a little bit. Like we have JSN. He can throw the ball great, but he's not a quarterback. If you want to talk about actually using a second quarterback in an offense, there are 2 pretty good examples. There's one that's really obvious, but I'm going to start with the other one first. Colin Kaepernick. Some people may not remember this, but before Colin Kaepernick became the starting quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, he was being utilized as like a little bit of a utility player who would come on in certain packages and typically run with the ball, but he was being utilized as like that rotational quarterback. Like this is the PFF page for his first well, not his first season, his second season in the NFL, 2012. And you can see that he lined up at quarterback 11, 15, 16 times in weeks 4 through 6. He also lined up a little bit in week 1 and week 7. Now, a couple of these games were blowouts, so some of it was him just getting in at the end of the game. But you can also see he's lining up a little bit as a running back, as a receiver, and not all of this stuff was just garbage time stuff. Some of this stuff was legitimately like, okay, we have a package for him, and we're going to put him in the game to keep the opposing offense on their opposing defense, on their heels. It wasn't until week 10 when Alex Smith got the concussion that Kaepernick actually took over as the full-time starter. So very, very short term, because if you go back to 2011, by the way, if you jump back to 2011, it wasn't really being utilized all that much. Like you can see that he got in a little bit in some blowouts, but they weren't really using him as like a secondary package type thing, right? Like if you go look at some of these games where they used him in this way, mostly they're blowouts, but there are some closer games as well. And if you look back at it, there was a clear strategy to keep the defense guessing. Now, the other example is the far more interesting one because this one's more recent, and there's also a little bit of correlation with our current offensive coordinator, of course, Taysom Hill. So I wanted to do a rundown of Taysom Hill's history as a player in the NFL and how he's been utilized. And I know my head is going to be blocking a little bit of the data on screen here. I'll zoom in a little bit, hopefully make that just a little bit better, but PFF does cram a lot of data into a pretty small field here. But going back to Taysom Hill in 2018, which was his second year in the NFL onward, pretty much almost every game, not literally every game, but almost every game he's healthy, he's getting to line up at quarterback a little bit. Like, this is 2018. This was a year the Saints were very good. The Saints should have gone to the Super Bowl in 2018. They suffered one of the worst no calls of all time to not make the Super Bowl. And you can see every game there's anywhere from 1 to 7 snaps where Taysom Hill is lining up at quarterback, and he's occasionally, not very often, but occasionally lining up in the backfield, does some inline stuff, does some work from the slot, does some work as a wide receiver. He's lined up as a quarterback 64 times across, if you count the playoffs, you're talking about, what would this be, like 18 games? No, it would be 17 games, right? I think it's 17 games. So on average, 3 to 4 times a game. But when you add in all the other utilizations, you can see how they are mixing and matching him across the offense. And look, Taysom Hill didn't throw the ball very much this year. He had 7 passing attempts, mostly ineffective when he was asked to do quarterback stuff. But there were some big plays, and he was also a productive runner, averaged over 5 yards a carry, almost 200 rushing yards, did a tiny bit of stuff as a receiver, not a lot, to be perfectly honest. But there was a little bit of a formula here. Now, what I will say is that Sean Payton was the architect of this offense, and he is one of the best offensive minds in the game, and is probably going to end up in the Hall of Fame for his brilliance as an offensive coordinator. Not everybody has the abilities of a Sean Payton, but you take a look at this and you're like, found a very interesting way to make it work. And again, I want to say this: third best offense in the NFL this year. This was a high-flying offensive attack. 31.5 points a game. So that's 2018. You jump to 2019, and not quite as prevalent, but it's still here. He's still lining up at quarterback on average like 1 to 3 times a game, I guess. And they're not shying away from it in a big game. Like in the wild card game, which, by the way, the Saints lost this game to the Vikings in overtime. They used Taysom Hill at quarterback more than they did in any other game that season. So it's not like he was only doing it in garbage time or at the end of games or on plays that didn't matter. They were not afraid to use it in high leverage moments. They lined up him up in the backfield maybe 1.5 times per game, a decent amount of inline work, did some slot stuff, wide stuff. So this is kind of the fantasy that some people have about how Milroe is going to operate in this offense in 2025. And again, you can see it's not so much using it to throw the ball. He completed 3 passes, Taysom Hill did in 2019. So it's not really about that. For the most part, when he gets the ball, he takes off and runs with it. 27 carries compared to 6 passing attempts. And also, actually, this year, he had over 200 receiving yards and 6 receiving touchdowns. So much more of a threat keeping the ball in his hands rather than throwing it to somebody else. But again, with Milroe as a rookie, that's probably what you want to be doing anyway. He's probably not going to be ready to read NFL defenses and actually do things with his arm against NFL defenses. He's going to be looking to use his legs. Go to 2020, and again, it's consistent. Now, some of the games, he actually started at quarterback. Weeks 11, 12, 13, 14, he was the starting quarterback. So the numbers are skewed, but in the games where he wasn't the starting quarterback, which is basically all the other ones, you can see that, again, it's just littered in here and there, a few plays a game. If you remove the games where he was actually the starting quarterback, you'd probably come out to something like 4 to 5 plays a game on average, maybe 6. And it's sprinkled in with the backfield, the inline, the slot, and the wide stuff. And these are not just one-offs, right? These are not just happening once a month. These are happening multiple times a game. And on the whole, Taysom Hill is getting on the field, even when he doesn't start a quarterback, he's getting on the field at least 10, maybe 20 times a game. And the 2020 Saints, this was the last year of Drew Brees. And there was there was certainly a little bit of a fall off in Brees' ability as a quarterback this season, but he remained the starter for every game that he could start. Taysom Hill did step in and actually win 3 games. So it's not very useful to look at these raw numbers because Taysom Hill started 4 games at quarterback, which is not what we're really talking about with Milroe. But it's interesting nevertheless. Now, I want to say that if something happens with Sam Darnold this year, if he gets hurt and misses time, I do believe that Drew Lock is going to be the quarterback. I think that Drew Lock will start. I think that Drew Lock is the backup, and I don't think there's much that can happen that can change that. I think that's why he's here. You didn't bring him in to not do anything. I think you brought him in to keep Jalen Milroe from having to inherit the starting quarterback spot in the event of an injury. So I'm thinking that even if Darnold gets hurt, Lock is the next man up. So even doing a 1-to-1 to this situation where Hill was the next man up ahead of Jameis Winston, who was the other backup quarterback in New Orleans this year, I don't think that would happen. I don't think it would go that way, but maybe Milroe earns it. Now, if you keep going, if you go into 2021, this was the year that Breeze retired. Taysom Hill again had to start a few games at quarterback, but in the games where he didn't start, it was kind of the same deal. Plays a handful of snaps at quarterback per game, somewhere around 3 to 5 on average. Does some backfield stuff, inline, slot, wide. Again, it's almost every game. This is still Sean Payton, by the way, worth noting. Now, the Saints had some real problems this year. Hill actually won 4 games as the starter when he was called on for those duties. And you can see that he was productive overall as a player. There were, of course, some obvious limitations, but he found ways to make things at least fun and watchable and interesting. 2022, this was the following year where Andy Dalton was the starting quarterback for the Saints. And you can see that, first of all, Taysom Hill, for the most part, was not ever called upon to be a full-time quarterback this year. Winston stepped in when Dalton got hurt. Dalton started every game at quarterback except for the 3 that Winston did. Hill did not start any games at quarterback, but you can see how much they leaned on it. He lined up at quarterback almost 10 times per game, which would have been a career high, I think, for season if you remove games that he actually was the starting quarterback. And they still did all the other stuff too. So there's this concerted, conceited effort across offensive coordinators to get him consistently involved. And if you look at the numbers, ran for almost 600 yards, caught 2 touchdowns, and had 13 completions. So it's meaningful, relevant impact season after season after season for some good offenses. Not all. Like the 2022 Saints offense was not good. Not even 20 points a game. Not even 19.5. But Taysom Hill, they leaned on him. And you go to 2023, it's kind of the same deal. He's getting good work at quarterback. We're talking 7 to 8 snaps a game at QB. We're talking almost 2 in the backfield, inline, slot, wide. Let me get the special team stuff out of here. You can see how much they're using him in the slot. It's like 8 snaps a game, almost. Yeah, it's like 8. Yeah. So lined up at receiver 200 times over this course of the season. And he missed a game, by the way. So this is only 16 games we're talking about here. So numbers actually a little bit more prolific than they even look. And again, like, he's not throwing the ball that much, but he's still finding a way to be a relatively effective player with just his legs and his receiving ability. If you combine rushing yards and receiving yards this year, it's almost 700. Now, again, this is the 2023 Saints. They're not great offensively, but they're good. They're top 10. They're actually 9th. And this team ended up with a winning record. They didn't make the playoffs, but Taysom Hill made meaningful contributions to a team without ever actually making a start at quarterback, with only throwing 11 attempts. Now, this one thing worth noting, and I don't know if this is because of age or Kubiak, but in 2024, which was the year where Kubiak was the offensive coordinator for the Saints, Taysom Hill saw a big downtick in the number of snaps he got at quarterback. I don't know if that's just because he couldn't do it the way he used to, or if Kubiak was trying to do things differently. It's interesting, though, because this was the year Derek Carr got hurt, and there was an opportunity for Hill to get a lot more action, but instead they went to Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener. Now, Hill was injured as well for part of the season, right? You can see that he missed significant time, but there were games where he could have stepped in and they didn't call on him to do it. But again, you're still seeing things getting mixed in here. And remember, theoretically, a player can throw a pass without lining up at quarterback. You can line up in the slot. You can do a wide receiver handoff. You can do a jet sweep and have it turn into a pass. So just because they're lined up somewhere else doesn't mean they can't act as a quarterback on a play. So you got backfield, inline, slot, wide, typical stuff. But again, I think he was kind of getting old. He was 34 when this season started. And the Saints, I mean, look, the Saints were quite bad. A lot of injuries. But you can, again, see the effort to get Taysom Hill involved in non-traditional ways. So this is the template if you want to try to pull something like this off. Now, at the end of the day, is this likely the way things are going to go? My thing is, when thinking about something like this, is that clearly there's a plan for Milroe to be the starting quarterback one day. Maybe next year, maybe the year after. It kind of depends on Darnold. But clearly, you didn't draft Milroe because you just wanted him to be Taysom Hill. So are you willing to utilize him like that, knowing that he is going to be your franchise guy at one point? Because the Saints never at any point harbored any illusions that Taysom Hill was going to be their full-time quarterback. They viewed him as a gadget player, and that's all they ever used him as. And while they did have to start him at certain points, they never really wanted to. They never gave him the starting quarterback job. So now, you did see that a little bit with Colin Kaepernick, because the Niners spent a second-round pick on him. And same thing with Cordell Stewart. Cordell Stewart, they did eventually make the starting quarterback in Pittsburgh. So that's kind of the tricky part here. Do you view using Milroe in this way as an obstacle to him becoming the starting quarterback later? I'm not sure. That's a little bit hard to figure out. That's a little bit hard to calculate. But if I had to guess, I would say we're going to see a pretty decent amount of Jalen Milroe on the field in these capacities. And the thing about this that I think could be fun is that Sam Darnold is not an elite quarterback. Some people think he's better than others, but I don't think anybody out there is going to say that Sam Darnold is some top 5 quarterback. The people who like him think he might be top 10, and the people who don't like him think he's maybe in the top 20. But nobody out there is saying he's in the top 5. So taking snaps away from Sam Darnold is not some big detrimental thing in my book. If we had a quarterback like a Josh Allen, I wouldn't want to take him off the field for gadget plays. I would want him on the field with the ball in his hands on every play. I wouldn't want to run any of these weird plays where I line up some other guy at quarterback. I want Josh Allen taking every snap. But with Sam Darnold, I'm a little more open to it. And I think that on a team like this that is going to run the ball as much as they're going to, it's an opportunity to throw something different at a defense. And that's the core of this stuff, right? To give the defense different looks. So I don't know if we're going to go all the way with it the way the Saints did with Taysom Hill, but expect to see some of this dual quarterback stuff in 2025 and expect it to be fun. See you guys later. Go Hawks.